When you're driving through the countryside in Europe, have you ever noticed how straight the roads are? It seems almost impossible that they could be so straight, and yet they are. But in reality, they just had a really good understanding of geometry and trigonometry. See, the Romans were able to use basic tools like a rope, a level. Then they would adjust the grade of the road so that it was slightly downhill from one end to the other. They had teams of surveyors who would go out into the countryside and measure out the angles and distances needed for the roads. But of a practical system developed by the Romans over 2,000 years ago, then they would mark the route of the road and the grade of the road. Then the actual construction of the road would start. This is important because it allowed water to drain off the road more easily. Finally, they would lay down the road surface, usually made of stone or concrete, and the road was finished. And a plumb bob, which is basically a weight on a string, to measure angles and distances with great accuracy. They also developed a practical system for road construction that was based on these measurements. And it turns out, there is a simple explanation for how the Romans were able to make such straight roads all those years ago. Then they would measure the distance between the 2 points and divide it into smaller segments. Next, they would set up a level at one end of the road and use a plumb bob to make sure that it was vertical. Then they would take a rope and attach it to the level and pull it tight. The rope would form a small circle, and the Romans would measure the angle between the circle and the ground. They would repeat this process at each of the smaller segments along the road, measuring the angle between the rope and the ground at each point. It's not what you think. Most people think that the Romans used advanced technology to make their roads super straight. Here's how it worked. First, the Romans would choose 2 points that they wanted to connect with a road. Once they had all of their measurements, the Romans would use basic trigonometry to calculate the length of each segment. It sounds complicated, but the Romans had a system for building roads. So the next time you're driving through the countryside and you see a nice straight road, you'll know that it's not just the result of advanced technology,